So, if you'll remember, at the end of last semester, we decided on this image. I thought for the first 2 or 3 classes, we'd do something we haven't done in a while and do kind of a class painting, right? That we're all on the same page. I think there's some value in doing that because we can learn from each other, right? It's easier to kind of compare and contrast when we're all on the same or doing the same image. Not necessarily the most exciting way to work, but
do you have some extra copies of it?
I have many copies. Well, none of you have copies of it except for me. And that's also another issue of money. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Let's get through this demo so maybe we can get some painting done today. So in the past, we have done projects similar to this, but in the past I've also focused more on establishing an accurate drawing first, right? So we've used pencils and done our initial sketch of the drawing. We've used transfer paper, right, to take the actual image, transfer it onto the canvas, and then just fill in the big shapes. We've kind of let the image dictate the approach from the get-go, right? Or, like been very conscious about trying to be exact in our representation of the photograph. And that's a perfectly legitimate way of going about things. Lots of artists work that way. And it's, it's a little bit more predictable, right? Like you can be sure that you're going to get closer to what you're looking at, if you actually establish the drawing, get proportions right, get all that stuff figured out before you develop the image too far. I would like to take a different tack with this painting. Last semester I showed you a video, that kind of fast forward video of, I can't even remember what it was, there's a lighthouse in there, there's a barn or something like that. That's more or less kind of the type of approach I'd like to take. So rather than figuring everything out, drawing and composition wise to begin with, we're going to kind of stumble into it, I guess, or kind of carve it out of a large block rather than starting with a more set game plan. So first, what I would like you to do, there's a couple different things that I'm going to focus on here. One is I think there is value in pre-mixing colors. All right? Especially those of you working with acrylic where there's issues with drying time, and if you don't have the color ready to go, you run the risk of not being able to blend, right? Because by the time you get the color mixed up, everything else is dry and you can't mix them together. So what I would like you to do to begin with is maybe just mix 4 base colors, right? Choose the big shapes, like in this case, for the background, I would just choose, blue. I'm going to disregard the clouds for the moment. Because we've got a gradation from light to dark in the background, it's easier just to paint that without trying to navigate around the clouds, and then we can just stack the clouds on later, right? So I'll just start with this kind of blue, maybe, one of these lighter or mid-tone colors for the rocks. This kind of darker mountain color right there. And there are reasons why I'm making these decisions. Usually you go dark to light, right, in oil and acrylic. So I'm kind of focusing on the darker colors, except for with these rocks I'm going to choose a lighter color just so I have contrast, right, so I can start, and that's just kind of a logistical problem more than like what good practices problem, if it makes sense. So there's a couple different reasons I'm making these decisions. Okay, so 1, 2, I'm going to clump all this stuff back here together, and maybe I'll introduce some of this green. So green here and then here. All right. The top color is a mixture of these two.
So you're saying we're not going to draw it first.
We're not drawing it first. Stick with me here, and I'll show you what I mean by this. So mix enough of that color to block in the general area, right? If you're using a big canvas, you need to mix a lot of paint, especially at this stage when we're blocking in large areas, right? See, a lot of you still where the biggest problem is that you're not mixing enough paint, and you're trying to scrub like just a little bit of paint across a huge, large area, right? It works in watercolor somewhat. It does not work in oil and acrylic. You've got to have enough paint out there to cover that surface area.
Which blues are you using?
I'm mixing ultramarine and cerulean blue, right? So a mixture of the two. In the image, it kind of goes from cerulean into ultramarine. I'm, again, just simplifying it down to one color to begin with. This, you'll notice, is darker, and it's more saturated than it is in the image. I'm going to err on the side of being too dark and too saturated because I can always tone it down, right? And I can take a little creative license and pump up the saturation a little bit, which a lot of people like to do, oftentimes poorly, especially in photography. I mean, you see this in Photoshop all the time. People just crank up the saturation levels and everything just gets candy colored, and you got to have saturation contrast too. Anyway, so I got that for the sky. Let me mix some of this chunky. Ugh. See, that's the wrong consistency.
Mix it with a medium?
You can mix it with medium if you have medium out on your palette, which this particular demonstrator does not. I apologize.
So you're just using burnt umber?
I've got burnt umber, so I'm going to mix a color that's kind of generally this-ish area, and I'm going to probably block it in all across here. So I'm going to add a bit of ultramarine blue, and that's going to knock down the saturation and take it a little bit cooler, and it's also going to darken it up a little bit.
And it'll make it better.
All right. Yeah, and it'll help me out with the consistency too. Get rid of. Okay, so that's close enough for right now. And what am I doing with acrylic? I'm taking my big clump of paint and I'm putting it on my wet paper towel so it doesn't dry out. It makes a huge difference, right? It'll stay wet for the whole class if it's on the wet paper towel, right? So it's worth kind of, maybe even having a separate wet paper towel for your mixed colors to keep them separated from your pure color. Okay, and then we've got this kind of lighter.
What is that?
Burnt sienna.
Ooh, that was a bad choice.
Like burnt sienna.
Yeah, burnt sienna, white. In fact, let me just not go there. I just contaminated it with the previous color, so I'm not going to mess with that. Burnt sienna white, and then some yellow ochre. Yeah, that yellow ochre is ready to go. It really does make a difference if you're painting with crappy paint. You feel like you're being, it's a good decision to be thrifty, but eventually it hurts you more than helps. So I really should just toss those. Okay, so this is the color that I'm using maybe for these kind of rock colors.
What about the white above it?
The white above what?
Oh, that looks like a cloud or something.
This right there, it's water.
Oh, it's water.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do with that?
I'm not even going to think about it yet. It's
Oh, I mean, you're not going to paint that one of the colors that you're mixing right now?
I will. I don't know which one yet, though.
Just kind of leave it.
To start with, I'm trying to edit out. There's a lot of fun, variations and different colors that can there for me to get distracted by. But right now, it's a good question. I don't know. Is the truth? I don't know what I'm going to do there quite yet. But right now, I'm just trying to edit out and keep things very simple. So I got my blue. Got my dark background, I've got this, and then I want some kind of greenish something that can go for the trees. And I'm going to try to keep this away from those colors. This is cadmium yellow medium, which is the warm yellow, right? You don't want typically, and really I probably wouldn't even squeeze out the cad yellow light, because usually in landscapes like this, when you have a warm light source, everything's warmer. So, I mean, you don't need your cool yellow. The lemon yellow tends to be a bit acidy, when you start mixing with other colors. Okay, then I would say kind of a cool blue. I don't know, maybe I'll take a little bit of both blues
So
there.
what would the cool blue be?
The cool blue would be the cerulean. Yeah.
What kind of yellow?
Cad yellow medium. And really, it's hard to mix a satisfying green. I'll probably end up having to either mix in a phthalo because you see how, like, this is a fairly neutral green. It's not very vibrant, especially compared to these greens up there. So really, you'll probably end up having to use phthalo if I want to get a really saturated green. Or
Sap green is good.
sap, you can use sap green. And there are, like, cadmium green. There are other, like, tubes of green. If you want a really satisfying green, you probably just pick up a tube of green rather than trying to mix it. Okay, so that's our green. Close enough. I'm running out of room here on my paper towel. I'm going to put it right there. Okay, so at this point, I think it might be worth leaving a little room on your, somewhere, and I'm just going to give myself some color swatches here to remind me which colors I started out with. And it also gives you kind of a chance to see those colors next to each other, and maybe you want to make slight alterations. This can kind of act as a color theme or scheme for your painting. A lot of digital artists, I see this a lot in demonstrations online. They'll actually do this same thing on their painting. Just put like 4 or 5 color swatches next to each other to kind of see if that's going to feel like a good color relationship for the overall painting before they start the image.
Can you
So,
put that on the back of your canvas? If
sure.
you're doing a canvas?
Well, if you're painting with oil and the back of your canvas isn't primed, then that probably isn't a good idea. But even just having a piece of paper, it's not, you don't need it to be permanent. Just something to the side. So I can decide whether or not I'm satisfied with those, how those colors are working. And if I'm not, this would be a good time to kind of make those adjustments before I start blocking in colors on the canvas. Okay, so next.
Why is that so difficult?
That's okay, Estelle. Your back is lovely too. We'll put that. You will be our featured actor.
Do I get credits?
Yes, with credit. Okay. So now what I'm going to do, I don't know how that got there, is I'm going to start just painting. Rick, you ruined the punch. I was trying to develop suspense. Okay, so maybe I'm gonna have a hard time painting like this because I really don't paint like this. So I'm already like trying to draw it in like I always do, but I don't want you to go that direction. What I want you to do, and I should have some medium.
You really need to kind of
Try it. If you don't,
can decide.
Yes, but I want you to be a little less specific as far as, I don't want you to like make lines. I want you to start thinking in terms of areas.
Shapes.
Right? Not even shapes, because shapes kind of make you think that you're getting at something that has edges and borders. I don't want you to think in terms of shapes. I want it to be more about just kind of blocking in clouds of color.
but if you want,
Right? And we're going to we'll start finding the edges and divisions as we develop the image. But to begin with, it's maybe kind of an arbitrary distinction, but I think an important one psychologically more than anything else is to begin with. Let's just block in areas of color. You remember that video last semester? He blocked in this barn, and the shape was way bigger than it ended up being. He kind of carved it down as he went through the image and made those adjustments in proportion and composition, kind of let that unfold with the overall painting. That's kind of what I'm after here, is rather than trying to nail down shapes and composition and proportion from the outset, instead let that kind of happen as you go throughout the painting. It's definitely not going to be comfortable for everyone, and it's not my chosen method of painting typically, but I think it's worth experimenting with. Okay, so next I'm going to start blocking in these mountains with this darker kind of color. I'm not going to clean my brush. And you see I don't have very much contrast there, so I'm not going to be able to see that edge very well. What am I gonna do? The suspense builds.
Are you using any medium or just water?
I don't have any medium out on my palette. I always forget something.
It looks like you're using a watercolor brush.
I didn't bring my.
Yeah. You could use this for watercolor. It's. I think you could use it for both. It's a synthetic round. I typically don't like working with rounds, but it's what I have. You can use it for acrylic though. There's no. So what I'm going to do is to get some of these lighter areas. I'm just going to pull some of this light color mix for the stone, and I'm going to incorporate some of that. So even though I started with just those 4 colors,
You're cheating.
I'm cheating. I'm just going to add a little bit of that to start getting a little bit of a sense of the contrast there, and I'm going to block that in up here.
That's the 5th color, huh?
Well, I don't even want you to think of it as a 5th color necessarily. We're starting with a base of these 4 colors, and there's still value in having that simplicity of just those fundamental 4 colors, and we can mix and match as it becomes necessary. Okay, so I've kind of blocked in this. I'm going to start blocking in some of the stones in the foreground. Again, thinking in terms of just kind of general areas. Don't even try to get the contours of that shape to match exactly, right? Because eventually we can come back and refine that edge and make sure the proportions of those stones or that grouping of stones is correct in relation to everything else. Right now, again, it's just more about kind of color and the relationship of different areas of color, and we'll nail down the composition more and more as we develop the image. Okay, so we've got some of this over here, and then we've got a big. This brush is a little bit too floppy. So with watercolor brushes, you have longer bristles, so they can hold more water, and you don't really need them to be stiff because the paint's not very viscous. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, there's the different brushes, but with acrylic and oil, you tend to want shorter bristles so they're stiffer, and you can move paint around a little bit more readily. Okay, so I'm kind of blocking that in, maybe just little dabs of that for these stones. And then I'm going to pull some of my green in. I'll wash my brush off. To this water area. It's obviously way too saturated for what this river is, but I'm not going to worry about that so much at this point. And this white area, I'm not even going to bother with it.
So if
Not even gonna
this
think about
in
it.
oil, then you have to do wet on wet, right? Like to change that green to, I can't see the picture. You said water, so is it bluish or light or white?
It's this color. It's just less saturated. With oil, using this technique, you're going to have to get used to the idea of using a rag to wipe off excess paint. If the paint starts getting too unmanageable, then you just got to take your palette knife or a paper towel and wipe off, and then start painting into it again. Plein air painters that use oil, that's what they do. Like they'll paint like this, but they're also not afraid to just scrape off excess paint and start over again. Okay, so I'm going to bring some of this green, even though it's not necessarily saturated enough, back up here into the back so I can kind of get a sense for these mountain areas. Okay. All right, and maybe
Abstract.
maybe that's all it needs to be. Okay. So for today, you guys see what I'm saying? Like it's far from correct proportion-wise, even color-wise, value-wise, general composition. I've still got a long way to go, but I've got kind of the underlying, structure starting to happen.
And if you did it in oil and you did just the earth tones, the raw umber and the burnt sienna and all those, it'll release easier to mix the correct color on top of those than if you use a green or a blue or something, won't it?
I did not catch that question. Say that one more time.
So,
Sorry, my brain was temporarily out of order.
Do that method,
Uh-huh.
and you use oil, and you use the blue and the green and all. When you go over it, it's not dry, and you have to paint over it. If you use the earth tones, it won't tend to get muddy so fast. Correct?
It depends, and that is a situation. That's what I'm talking about with oil, especially.
So wipe it off.
If it starts getting unmanageable or the color is not saturated enough and it's mixing in with the color that's on the canvas already, then there's nothing else to do but to take a paper towel and wipe it off and clean your brush and paint again.
I have a question. When you're doing your trial colors, how do you know whether they're going to work, or are you just doing them in the saturated phase of what you're seeing? I mean, how do you know these colors are all going to be?
I don't know.
We don't. So
No.
you're going to have to adjust them while you're painting.
Yeah, and if I get to this place and the colors just aren't working, then I can make adjustments and paint on top of it. The quick answer is that you don't know.
Okay.
And that's part of the reason why we want to work this way, is we can make these adjustments on a large scale before we start locking down the details.
Because even at this point, I'm not sure whether those colors would work for me, you know. But I don't know.
Oh, they probably wouldn't. But give it a try. And it takes practice, right? And like I said, there were considerations I made in the colors I mixed that were just for my sanity, right? For kind of how mentally I work and put together a painting. So it'll change. You can also take a little more creative license and really punch the saturation of the colors or change the colors entirely. That's why this is a good idea, is because you can kind of gauge whether or not your color scheme is working.
Roadmap.
Right. Okay, so I have copies of the image for everyone.